She booked the flight on a Tuesday night without telling anyone. Not her mother, who would have listed 11 reasonable concerns before saying go, and whose voice on the phone always made Bessie feel 12 again. Capable and beloved and somehow also in need of a coat. Not her manager at the Atlanta agency she was leaving on a 30-day notice, because that conversation was already scheduled, and she didn't want it contaminating the decision. Not even Kiara, her best friend, who would have said go before Bessie finished the sentence, but whose enthusiasm she wasn't ready to borrow yet. She needed this to be entirely her own first, clean, unwitnessed, irreversible. 12 hours and 40 minutes later, Bessie Carter walked out of the jet bridge at Incheon International Airport with a suitcase she'd packed in under 2 hours, a backpack holding 3 months of creative work, and the particular brand of composure that comes not from confidence, but from having decided, early, definitively, somewhere over the Pacific, that falling apart was simply not an available option. She had a plan. She always had a plan. The data SIM she'd ordered online was supposed to activate at the gate. It didn't. The transport card she'd purchased through an international app was not the card sold at the airport counter, a distinction the website had failed to mention in any of its 4 pages of instructions. The program housing address existed in 2 versions across the emails she'd received, and the translation app froze at the exact moment she needed to ask the counter clerk which subway line connected to Mapo-gu. She moved to a corner. Not to panic. She was not panicking. To recalibrate. She opened her phone. No signal. Closed it. Opened it. Closed it again. Around her, Incheon operated at full speed. The kind of airport that makes you feel like the entire world knows exactly where it's going except you. She was not going to be the foreigner who arrived and immediately needed saving. She'd read 3 guides, memorized the transit map, studied the program address in both Romanization and Hangul. This was a logistics problem. Logistics problems had solutions. She just needed 60 seconds, and she needed them unwitnessed. That's when the man appeared. He didn't rush over, didn't ask if she was okay. The question that always sounds like a verdict dressed in concern. He arrived beside her with the ease of someone solving an equation he's encountered before, and he said, in English, in the tone of someone relaying information rather than offering charity. Data SIM. Second counter on the right. Transport card is the blue machine over there, different from the one sold online. What's your address? She looked at him. He didn't look away, but he wasn't performing patience either. He was simply present. Still. Dark hair slightly messy, calm eyes, a pen behind his ear. The kind of stillness that isn't emptiness, but its opposite. She showed him the screen. 2 addresses, different zip codes. Second email is correct. First had a typo. He glanced toward the exit. Airport Railroad to the city, then line 2. About 40 minutes total. She waited for the catch. There was none. He was already turning to leave. Thank you, she said. And it came out smaller than she intended, stripped of the armor she usually built around favors. He stopped. Turned. For exactly 1 second, he looked at her the way people look at something they recognize without being able to name it yet. Not assessment. Not pity. Recognition. The particular kind that costs something to admit, that requires having carried the same weight yourself before you can identify it in a stranger. Then he nodded once, and walked away. Bessie stood still for 3 seconds. Then she put on her headphones, grabbed her suitcase, and moved toward the right exit. But before the crowd swallowed him entirely, she looked back. He was already gone. Just the question stayed, somewhere between her ribs, light and persistent. Who is this man who saw her without needing her to ask? She flew to Korea alone. She had a plan for everything, except him. If this is already speaking to something in you, if you've ever sent a voice note saying everything's fine and felt how hollow it sounded, subscribe and stay. Your support is what keeps us writing stories like this one. And there are more where this came from. The program housing was a 6-floor apartment in Mapo-gu. Clean, spare, smelling faintly of new linens and someone else's departure. Bessie set her suitcase by the window and didn't unpack for 6 minutes. She just stood there, looking at a city that didn't know her yet, and let herself feel the full weight of it, the enormity of having chosen this alone, the particular vertigo of standing in the exact place you fought to reach. Exactly once. Then she put it away, stored it in the compartment she kept for things that were true but inconvenient. Then she made a list. That's how she processed everything. Not through feeling, but through action items, which was its own kind of feeling she'd long ago learned to work with, rather than around. SIM card, confirmed working. Transport card, loaded. Project outline, review tonight. Orientation, tomorrow, 9 a.m. First week goal, don't give anyone a reason to question the decision. The Hanyang Creative Residency wasn't tourism. It was a 12-week program embedded in a cultural technology space in Mapo, accepting 8 international designers per cycle, structured around a real deliverable, a physical installation, public presentation, active mentoring. Bessie had applied twice. The first rejection had come with a single line of feedback, promising but unresolved, that she'd printed out and taped to her monitor for 4 months as a kind of productive wound. The second application had taken 4 months of revisions and one very difficult conversation with herself about whether she was applying to grow or to prove something. She had never fully answered that question. She'd come anyway. Orientation the next morning ran in 2 languages, Korean and English, with a brief lapse into Mandarin for one participant from Shanghai, and lasted 3 hours. 8 residents seated around a long table, each carrying the specific tension of people who'd worked very hard to be somewhere and were now quietly terrified of not being enough. Bessie recognized that tension because she lived in it. She just didn't let it show on her face. Oh Hyejin walked in at 9:04, and the room adjusted without a word being said. She was 32, wore a wine-colored blazer like it was her second skin, and had a pen tucked in her hair bun with the air of someone who took it out only when something important needed to be signed or crossed out. She set a folder on the table that she didn't open, looked at each resident once, and then spoke. "You were selected because your work showed promise," she said. "You are not here to be comfortable. You are here to deliver a project that is true. Not impressive. True. There is a difference. Learn it quickly, because the cycle does not wait while you figure it out." Bessie wrote that down. Not because she needed to, she already understood it, but because writing things down was how she made promises to herself. After orientation, she stayed behind while the others drifted toward coffee and introductions. Hyejin was gathering her materials when Bessie approached. "The project brief mentions a public-facing component," Bessie said. "Can you clarify the format expectations?" Hyejin looked at her with the expression of a woman deciding whether someone was asking out of diligence or anxiety. Physical installation. Presented at end of cycle. Real audience, not an academic panel, not a review committee. People who came for other reasons and walked in anyway. She paused. "Is that a problem?" No, it wasn't. But it was also the first time the full scale of the thing landed in her chest, as something with actual weight, rather than abstract challenge. "Thank you." She walked out into a corridor smelling of espresso and printer ink, and she nearly collided with a man coming around the corner carrying a notebook in one hand and 3 lanyards tangled in the other. He stopped. She stopped. He had dark, slightly messy hair, a pen already behind his ear as if it had always lived there, and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that rushing creates more problems than it solves. He looked at her with the quick, impersonal recognition of someone matching a name to a face from a roster. "Bessie Carter," he said. "Room 4, Workspace C. I'm the production coordinator for the space, Julian Park." He held out one of the lanyards. "Your access badge." She took it. And then, because she had spent more energy than was reasonable on not showing recognition, she said, "Have we met before?" He looked at her steadily. "Yesterday, Incheon." A pause. "The SIM card." She had known the moment she saw him. She'd been hoping he hadn't known she'd known. "Right," she said. The second email was correct. I confirmed with the housing office this morning. She couldn't tell if he was amused or simply thorough. His expression occupied a register she hadn't yet learned to read. "I figured it out," she said, and heard the smallness of it as it left her mouth. "I know," he said. "You looked like someone who already would." He moved past her toward the main hall. She stood in the corridor holding her lanyard, turning that sentence over. Someone who already would. And could not determine whether it was observational or something else. She filed it alongside the question from the airport. Present, unresolved, refusing to be ordinary. She put on the lanyard. She went to find workspace C. She came to Seoul to prove she didn't need anyone. The problem was, he didn't read that script. Tokkurbain. The first week was a test in disguise, and Bessie recognized the shape of it early. The residency operated on a structure she hadn't fully anticipated. Residents worked in the open creative hub alongside the space's own production team, which meant shared printers, overlapping schedules, a communal coffee system that was either excellent or depleted, and the continuous low hum of other people's deadlines. It also meant she encountered Julian Park more often than any plan of hers had accounted for. He moved through the space the way people move through places they know intimately. Economy of motion, no wasted energy, the particular confidence of someone who has been somewhere long enough to stop thinking about how to be there. A pen always behind his ear. The notebook always accessible. He managed the logistics of 8 international residents and a 30-person production team, with the visible effort of someone organizing a grocery list, and the invisible effort of someone who had long ago learned that the difference between a space working and not working was often a single person who paid close attention to things others considered too small to notice. She noticed. She cataloged it. She went back to work. "You're the American," said a voice to her left on Wednesday morning. Bessie looked up. A Korean woman in a structured blazer was standing 2 workstations away, with an untouched coffee in one hand, and the expression of someone making an observation rather than a judgment. "Bessie Carter," Bessie said. "Choi Min Seo, editorial production. This space." She looked at Bessie's monitor. "Your color palette is competing with your concept. The idea is strong, but you're being visually cautious around something that deserves commitment." Bessie blinked. "We haven't been introduced before this." "I read all the project briefs on Monday." Minseo took a sip of her coffee, made the brief expression of someone who'd forgotten it was cold, and set it down with the air of someone who would not be returning to it. "Julian said your work was interesting. I was curious whether the application matched the reality." "He said that?" He said it, and he underlined the brief. She was already walking away. He doesn't underline. Bessie spent the rest of Wednesday's work session being not distracted by that information, which required more effort than the actual work. That evening she sent Kiara a voice note. 3 minutes, 22 seconds. She talked about the orientation, the apartment view, the city's transit efficiency, the other residents. At the end, with the particular lightness she deployed when she wanted something to sound like a footnote. "Everything's fine. Really, genuinely good. Talk soon." Kiara replied in 6 seconds. Voice note, no preamble. "That's the organized voice. I know the organized voice. It's the one where everything is technically accurate and none of it is the point. I'll be here when you're ready for the real version." Bessie laughed out loud in her apartment, alone, at 9:47 p.m. Soul time, and the laugh surprised her with how much she needed it. Thursday brought the first team dinner. Residents and production staff at a grilled meat restaurant 2 blocks from the hub. Casual in format, not in meaning. The seating arrangement communicated everything. Hae-jin at the head, senior staff to her left, residents in an order that wasn't alphabetical and wasn't random and that nobody explained. She was standing near the entrance reading it when Julian appeared beside her, close enough to speak quietly. "Sit at the left side of the center table," he said, in the tone of someone passing along useful information. Hae-jin addresses the left first, when she does her project rounds. If you're ready, it's an advantage. How do you know I won't be ready? I don't. I know that if you are ready, the position helps. He moved past her toward the back of the restaurant. It's logistics. You seem like someone who uses logistics. She sat where he indicated. Hyojin addressed the left table first. Bessie was ready. The exchange was brief and professional, and when it was over, Bessie could feel 3 other residents tracking it. Walking back from the restaurant later, she fell into step beside him without making a decision about it. You didn't introduce yourself during the team presentations, she said. You coordinate the entire space. That should have been mentioned. I prefer being useful to being mentioned. He said it without deflection, just as a matter of preference. She turned it over. That sounds like a choice with a cost. He looked at her briefly. Most choices do, he said, and turned toward the building entrance. She stood on the sidewalk a half-second too long before following. In the lobby, she checked her lanyard badge by reflex, the habit of someone who had been stopped at enough doors to never want to be caught without proof of belonging. Her name on it, his handwriting. She filed that away too. The filing cabinet was getting full. By the end of the second week, Bessie had learned 3 practical truths about Seoul that no guide had mentioned. First, the beautiful cafes were almost always at the top of a hill, as though the city had collectively decided that good coffee required a degree of earning. Second, the subway was a genuine engineering marvel, but the signage during construction detours operated on a logic that required local intuition she was still developing. Third, and most immediately relevant, the administrative forms for the residency's equipment loan system were entirely in Korean, and the official English translation provided by the program had at least 4 terms that rendered differently depending on which translation app you used, the critical difference being between program-assigned asset and personal property, which carried entirely different implications for liability. She spent 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning determining which category applied to the specialized monitor she needed for her installation prototype. The equipment coordinator, a brisk man named Jae-won, could not resolve it in English. Bessie had her phone open to 3 different apps simultaneously, none agreeing. Julian walked past, glanced at the screen, and stopped. Clause 7 uses a term that officially means program-assigned asset, he said. Jae-won defaults to the stricter reading. What you want is the addendum form 7b, not 7a. Where is 7b? It doesn't exist digitally. You write the request by hand and Jae-won stamps it. He was already moving toward the supply drawer. I'll get the paper. She wanted to say she was handling it. She wanted to say she hadn't asked. She said neither of those things, because they would have been simultaneously true, and beside the point, and she was honest enough with herself to know the difference. How do you know all of this? She asked when he came back. 4 years coordinating this space. Jae-won's been here 11. The forms are partly his personal system. He set the blank form down. He stamps faster if you bow slightly when you hand it over. Not deeply, just acknowledgement. He won't mention it, but it makes a difference. She took the form. That's not written anywhere. Most of the things that matter aren't. She filled out the form, bowed slightly when she handed it to Jae-won, and had the equipment confirmed in 6 minutes. Jae-won smiled, a small, genuine smile, and she realized she'd been in Seoul for 2 weeks, and this was the first time a logistical interaction had felt anything other than transactional. She didn't tell Julian it worked. He already knew it would. What she told Kiara that evening, in a voice note she almost didn't send, because it revealed more than she intended, and she could feel that before she pressed record, was, "There's someone here who keeps solving things I didn't ask him to solve. Not in a presumptuous way. In a way that's actually useful. And the reason it bothers me is that I can't figure out what he gets from it. Because people don't help without getting something. So either I'm not seeing it yet, or he's genuinely different, and I don't have a good category for that." Kiara called her immediately. "Say that last part again slowly," Kiara said. "It's a professional observation." "Sure it is. What's his name?" Bessie ended the call. But she was already smiling when she did it, which was information she chose not to analyze. She got up at 2 a.m. to revise her project outline. Not because of insomnia, but because the project was stuck in a way she couldn't locate. And she'd learned the only way to unstick it was to sit with it in the quiet until something loosened. She made tea the way she'd watched Julian make it, with the patience of someone who didn't rush processes that required time, and sat at the small kitchen table with the project files open and the city going about its late-night business outside the window. By 4 a.m., she had something that felt truer. Not finished, just closer to honest. The 3 sections Hyejin had identified were there, solid and clear, and she was starting to see how to build from them rather than around them. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was the first sign of one. She went back to sleep. In the morning, she would return to the space and find Julian already there, notebook open, coffee made. The room settled into its working rhythm the way it always was when he'd been there for a while. She would sit at workspace C and open her files, and they would both work in the particular parallel quiet that had developed between them over 3 weeks, without either of them naming it. She didn't send a voice note to her mother that night. She was saving it for when she had something true to say. The mid-cycle review had not been on the calendar. Hyejin had made that clear in orientation. I review when I see something worth reviewing, early or late. Which meant that when she appeared at Bessie's workstation on a Thursday afternoon, project files visible on 2 screens, and her expression carrying the particular focus of someone who had already formed a preliminary opinion, Bessie understood immediately that this was not a social stop. Hyejin looked at the screens in silence for 1 full minute. That minute lasted significantly longer than 60 seconds. "The concept is strong," she said finally. "The execution is cautious. It's still in the development phase. It's cautious." She pointed to the visual component. "Every choice on this layer is defensible. That means every choice is also safe. And safe doesn't live in an installation people walk through. It just hangs there, waiting to be evaluated." She pulled up a comparison view without asking. "Look at the entry sequence. You've given the visitor 3 different points where they can feel oriented before they feel anything." "Why?" Bessie was quiet. "Because if they're oriented," Hyejin said, answering her own question, "they can process it, and if they can process it, they can stay at a distance from it." She looked at Bessie directly. "You are designing for a safe distance. I need you to design for proximity. There's a section in here." She indicated 3 specific areas where proximity is already happening. "The rest is scaffolding around something you haven't yet let yourself commit to. Why?" The word "why" landed differently the second time. Not as accusation, as genuine inquiry from someone who had been in the same room herself once. Bessie met her eyes, said nothing. Hyejin nodded, slowly, as if the silence confirmed something she'd already suspected. 2 weeks. Show me the version you're afraid to show." She closed the comparison view and left. Bessie sat for 4 minutes without moving. She was counting her breathing without being conscious of it. A habit she'd built in her first year out of school, when she'd learned that the only way to survive a professional blow without making it worse was to wait until the room stopped tilting before she did anything at all. The room stopped tilting. She saved the files, closed her laptop, and went to get water. Julian was in the communal kitchen making tea, and there was a second cup already set beside the kettle, as if he'd moved on automatic. He pushed it toward her when she appeared, without comment. She took it, wrapped both hands around it. "Hyejin reviewed me," she said, not asking for sympathy, just needing to say it out loud to confirm it was real. "I heard the register from across the room." He poured his own cup. "What was the critique?" "That I'm designing for approval." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she wrong?" She looked at him. "I'm asking seriously," he said, "because if she's right, it's useful. If she's wrong, you need to know why she is. Both require an actual answer." She held the cup. The heat was grounding. "She's not entirely wrong," she said, and saying it felt like setting down something she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since Atlanta. There are 3 sections where I know exactly what I want to say. The rest is protection around those 3 sections, structure around the honest part because the honest part felt too exposed on its own. Then build outward from the 3. He said it the way he said most things, not dramatic, not dismissive, just accurate, as if the answer had been there the whole time and he'd simply located it. She looked at him. He had no idea he'd just given her the clearest direction she'd received since landing in Seoul, delivered in 12 words over tea in a program kitchen. She didn't tell him that. "Thanks for the tea," she said. "You're welcome." He went back to his desk. She stood in the kitchen a moment longer. Then she went back to her workstation, opened the laptop fully, and deleted 2 weeks of careful choices. That night, she sent no voice note. Not to Kiara, not to her mother. She sat with the silence of it, the quiet of having been seen clearly by someone with no particular reason to look that closely. And she didn't know whether to be grateful or alarmed. She was pretty sure it was both. She decided that was fine. Sunday in Seoul had a specific quality she hadn't anticipated. The city didn't slow down. It never truly slowed. But the rhythm changed, became briefly human in a way that the weekday pace didn't allow. Families at the Han River parks. The particular stillness of residential streets at 10 in the morning before the city remembered itself. Coffee shops full of people sitting with their phones and their conversations, and the particular ease of people who were somewhere they belonged. The city became, on Sundays, domestic and warm and entirely coherent, and the distance between witnessing that warmth and being inside it felt, on this specific Sunday in the 6th week, wider than usual. Bessie was in her apartment at 3 in the afternoon with her project open, not touching it. A coffee growing cold at her elbow. Outside, the sky was running through something complicated with the afternoon light, and the city below had the quality of a painting made for someone else to look at. She sent Kiara a voice note. 2 minutes, 23 seconds. She talked about the mid-cycle review turnaround, the revised project direction, the way the city looked from the apartment window on a clear day. Organized, accurate. At the end, with the inflection she'd used since she was 22 to signal that a conversation was wrapping up satisfactorily. "Everything's fine. Really good, actually. Miss you." Kiara's reply arrived in 40 seconds. Voice note. "Okay, I know that voice. I've known that voice for 6 years. It's the voice where everything is going correctly, and you are alone inside it, and you will not say that because saying it would mean it's a problem, and problems mean you should have planned better. I love you. I'll be here when you're done being fine." Bessie set her phone on the table face down, looked at the ceiling for a moment, looked at the project. The project looked back with all the patience of an inanimate object waiting for its creator to stop stalling. Her phone buzzed. Not Kiara. Julian Park. There's a lookout point near Mapo that gets good at this hour if the clouds cooperate. No obligation either way. She looked at that message for a reasonable amount of time. She examined it for subtext, found some, examined whether she wanted to act on it, found that she did, and typed back. Which exit? He sent the subway stop and a location pin. Nothing else. No explanation, no follow-up question, no social scaffolding around the invitation. Just the information, clean. She was there in 20 minutes. He was already at the lookout, sitting on a low stone wall with his notebook closed in both hands and his attention on a section of the Han River where the afternoon light was doing exactly the thing it had been threatening to do for hours, turning the water briefly, improbably gold. She sat beside him. Not close. Just beside. Below, the city moved in its Sunday register. Slower, more human. Unhurried in a way that made the whole week feel briefly survivable. The river held the light. A child somewhere to their left was losing an argument about ice cream with great commitment and no strategy. 10 minutes passed. She was aware of them passing the way. She was always aware of time, tracking it, banking it. And at the end of the 10 minutes she realized, in the way you realize things that have been true for a while before you name them, that she hadn't thought about the project, hadn't calculated anything, hadn't performed anything for anyone. She had just been present in a city that had felt, until this moment, primarily like something to be navigated, and the feeling was so unfamiliar, it took her a moment to identify it as rest. "You grew up between languages," she said. Not a question, a hypothesis she was testing. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the river. Korean at home, English everywhere else. A long time before either felt like home rather than a performance. What changed it? I stopped waiting to feel like I'd arrived and started building something instead. A pause that wasn't awkward. It's different from belonging, but it works. She understood that more specifically than she would have expected, sitting on a stone wall in Mapo in October light. "The agency I left in Atlanta. I built something real there," she said. And she heard herself choosing honesty over the version of the story that made her look intentional rather than injured. It dissolved in an acquisition. Half the work I'd spent 3 years building just stopped existing in the way I'd meant it. I came here to build something that was mine alone, that no acquisition could touch. He didn't offer a reframe. Didn't say, "That sounds hard," in the way that people say it when they want the conversation to move past the hard thing. He just received it. "That's a specific kind of grief," he said, when the thing that was taken wasn't a person, but still felt like one. She looked at him. He was watching the river. The pen was behind his ear. His notebook was closed on the wall beside him, and he had no idea, she was fairly certain, that he had just described her experience more accurately than she had managed to describe it in any voice note she'd sent in 6 weeks. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Exactly that. If this is already touching something in you, you already know what to do. Stay here." Ta Pernoman. They stayed until the gold left the water entirely, and the river became the ordinary silver of an early evening city. The walk back was quiet in a way that had changed in quality. Before the lookout, the silences between them had been the kind that require management, brief enough not to become awkward, filled when necessary with professional information. This quiet was different. It had less friction. It was the kind of silence shared between people who have said something real and understand that filling the space after it would diminish rather than extend what had been said. He walked with his notebook under one arm, and at a narrow section of sidewalk crowded with delivery bikes, he put a hand briefly at her elbow to steer her clear of the obstacle. Not lingering, functional. But she noticed, and the noticing told her something about the distance between them that she catalogued without naming. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. At the airport. You didn't know me. You had no reason to stop." He was quiet for a moment. The considered kind, not the evasive kind. "I had information you needed. Most people who have information don't stop. Most people aren't paying attention." He shifted the notebook. "I grew up watching my father navigate places that didn't make room for him to ask for help. You develop a reflex for it, recognizing when someone needs the next piece and doesn't have it yet. I saw your expression. I had the information. Stopping was the obvious thing." She absorbed that. The reference to his father again. Quiet, brief, carrying weight disproportionate to its size. "Is he here? In Seoul?" "Yes." A pause with texture. "He has good stretches and less good ones. I build my schedule around both." He said it without performance, not seeking acknowledgement, not deflecting from it. Simply factual in the way that only long-accepted truths are. "That's a significant amount to carry alongside everything else," she said. "So is rebuilding alone in a city that doesn't know you yet." He glanced at her. "Neither of us is doing something extraordinary. We're just doing it." She laughed, short, genuine, the kind that surprised her coming out. The laugh she saved for Kiara, the one that acknowledged when something had landed accurately enough to be slightly inconvenient. They reached her building. "Thank you," she said. "For the pin, and the clouds, and the rest of it. The clouds cooperated independently. She smiled. He had the low version of the same, contained, but real. She went inside. He continued the 2 blocks to his apartment, and somewhere in those 2 blocks he opened the notebook to a new page. He wrote, "Her laugh when something is too accurate to argue with. Short, genuine, nothing performed about it." Then he looked at what he'd written, turned the page deliberately, and continued the logistics list he'd been working on before the message about the lookout, as if the 2 things were separable, as if placing them in sequence made them distinct. They were not distinct. That Min Seo made the observation on a Wednesday at 10:14 a.m. with a coffee she had already forgotten was cold. "You're taking fewer notes," she said to Julian, who was at the shared workspace reviewing a vendor contract with the focus of someone who had reviewed many vendor contracts. He looked up. "The notes are consistent." She looked at the notebook, open beside the contract. He followed her gaze. The current page had vendor delivery windows, a loading dock availability note, a reminder about calibration confirmation with J1, and then, below a dividing line he had drawn without being conscious of drawing it, 4 other entries. Bessie's coffee preference, observed during the 2nd-week production meeting. A sentence she'd said in a project conversation, transcribed exactly because the phrasing was precise. A brief description of the lookout, not timing or logistics, nothing logistical about it. And a Korean phrase he had written at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, in smaller handwriting than the rest, after a night where he had tried 3 times to stop thinking about the river turning gold and the quality of someone's silence when they're finally resting. "Those aren't work notes," Min Seo said, without inflection. Julian closed the notebook. Acknowledged. "I'm not criticizing." She turned back to her screen. "I'm documenting. In several years, I will say I told you so, and I will want the date on record. Min Seo. I know what it cost you last time," she said very quietly, still looking at her monitor. "That's the only reason I'm saying anything at all." He said nothing. After a moment, she took her cold coffee to the kitchen, where it would join the others. Later, after she'd left for a production meeting, Julian opened the notebook again. He turned back pages he hadn't revisited since writing them. He found the route from the subway to the hub, annotated with a note about a cafe she'd mentioned in passing on the 3rd day, a place she'd said she wanted to try when the project pressure let up, a place she had not yet mentioned again. He had kept the route in case the opportunity arose to mention it naturally. He was aware of how that sounded. He found a page from the week after the lookout that he'd thought was blank. It wasn't. He'd written, in the half-conscious handwriting of someone working on instinct rather than intention, the phrase that was now also on the latest page. "Jib 같은 사람이 있다는 걸 잊고 있었다." I had forgotten that a person could feel like home. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called his father back about the pharmacy refill, the grocery order, the maintenance report for the building management office. He wrote everything down, called the pharmacy, arranged the delivery, left the building message. Afterward, he sat in the apartment with the notebook on the table and the city quiet outside, and thought, with the kind of clarity that only arrives after you've stopped trying to be fair to yourself. She has a return ticket. She booked it before she boarded. Everyone I've let past a certain distance has left because that's what people do when their lives are elsewhere. They go back to their lives. And he had roots that did not move, and a father who needed him, and a city that knew him, and that had been, for a long time, enough. It had been enough. He turned the notebook to a new page, wrote the next task on the logistics list, pressed down harder on the pen than was necessary. Below the list, in smaller letters, a one-way flight from Seoul to Atlanta cost less than a month's rent. He had not been looking that up. He had. Derperfer. The project found its shape on a Tuesday afternoon in the 7th week. Not in a single breakthrough. She'd stopped waiting for those years ago, having learned they were mostly retroactive fictions, people told about processes that were actually gradual. It happened the way real things happened. She stopped protecting the 3 honest sections, and started building outward from them instead of around them. And suddenly the scaffolding she'd been constructing for weeks became unnecessary, and she dismantled it in one afternoon. And what remained was something she could look at without immediately wanting to explain. She showed the revised concept to Hye-jin the following morning. Hye-jin stood at the screen for a full minute, the same quality of silence she'd used for the first review, but with different content inside it. Then she reached into her hair bun, removed the pen, the gesture Bessie had started to read as indicating something worth signing or marking. She circled one section of the installation layout. "This is the center," Hye-jin said. "Everything else exists to bring someone to this moment. Don't let it get buried under the approach." She held the pen for a moment, then returned it to her bun. "You adjusted." "I had useful information," Bessie said. Hye-jin looked at her with an expression she'd never shown before. Not approval precisely, but the specific recognition of someone who has been in the same position and remembers clearly what it cost. "Useful information is everywhere," Hye-jin said. "Having the willingness to use it is not the same thing. Give yourself credit for the right thing." She left. Bessie stood at her workstation with the particular feeling of something solidifying. Not completion, but direction. The difference between wandering a city and starting to know it. That evening, the hub was nearly empty by 7. Bessie was assembling a visual reference board for the physical installation, the wall panel materials, the lighting angles, the entry sequence Julian had mentioned, when she realized she'd been narrating her choices aloud, quietly, without deciding to. She stopped. "Keep going," Julian said, from his desk across the hub. He hadn't looked up from his screen. "You're working through a spatial problem. Narrating it helps locate the sticking point. Were you listening? Processing invoices. The narration frequency suggests you're close to something." He looked up briefly. Interrupting would be counterproductive. She turned back to the board and kept narrating, and 20 minutes later she had it. The full sequence. The way the space needed to move a person from the entry compression into the center's release. She turned the monitor toward him. He looked. "The entry point," he said, after a moment. "You want the visitor to feel the weight before the release. So the entry needs to be narrower than you'd think. Almost uncomfortable. Then the expansion lands harder." She stared at the layout. He was right. She hadn't seen it. "How do you do that with spaces that aren't your field?" she asked. He looked at his notebook, touching the cover without opening it. "I grew up in rooms that required reading before you entered. You learn spatial language by necessity." They held a look for a moment that was different in register from the ones before it. Not charged in an obvious way. More like the moment just before a question gets asked, when both people in a conversation know the question is there, and neither has decided whether to ask it. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and something moved in his face. The weight she recognized from when he mentioned his father. He stepped into the corridor. She went back to her board. She did not look at the corridor again. She told herself this 3 times, which was 2 times more than was necessary. She worked until the board was finished. When she left, Julian's desk was dark, and his notebook was on the surface, face down, where he'd left it when the call came in. The extension offer arrived on a Thursday at 11:47 a.m. The program had received additional funding for a secondary cycle. Residents whose projects met specific criteria could apply for a 4-week extension. Different contract terms, modest stipend increase, the exhibition upgraded to a larger public venue. Her project met all the criteria. The email was clean and professional and did not tell her what to do, which was the hardest kind. She made a list. She always made a list. Pros. More time to develop the physical installation. The larger venue fit the project's scale better. The work deserved it. Cons. The return flight was already booked. Her apartment sublet had a 30-day hold on it, and 4 more weeks in Seoul, with the project moved past the point of consuming all her attention, would not be purely about work anymore. She didn't write that last item on the list. She thought it very clearly and kept it out of the record. Julian's call the evening before had been about his father. She'd understood that from the quality of his attention the next morning, the layer of him that was somewhere else, while the rest of him managed the day's tasks efficiently. She knew that texture because she carried the same one sometimes. The version of yourself that is present and performing while the important thing is being handled below the surface. She didn't ask. He didn't volunteer it. They both maintained the professional register, with the careful precision of people who have decided that the distance is safer than the alternative. By Friday, the distance had become explicit. She found reasons to work at the far end of the hub. He stopped creating small moments of proximity, the coincidences of timing that she'd started, without admitting it, to rely on. The coffee she would find beside her workstation some mornings was not there Friday or Saturday. The Wednesday evening workspace, that accidental intimacy of two people working late while the city went dark outside, didn't happen that week or the next. Min-seo appeared beside Bessie at the coffee station on Friday afternoon, coffee in hand, untouched. "He's not actually busy," Min-seo said. "His calendar this week is lighter than average." Bessie looked at her. "He's creating distance," Min-seo said. "Not because he wants to, because it's the option that feels like control." "I don't think that's a conversation we should be having," Bessie said carefully. "No, probably not." Min-seo looked at her coffee. 3 years ago, I watched him do the same thing with someone leaving for London. I said nothing because it wasn't my business. He spent the next 4 months being very productive and very alone. I have strong feelings about not making identical choices twice. A silence. "I don't know if I'm staying," Bessie said. "I know." Min-seo put the cup down. She would not return to it. "That's not the part I'm commenting on." She walked away. Bessie finished her coffee alone. She thought about the extension email, still unanswered in her inbox. She thought about a man who moved through this city like he'd built himself into it, who helped people without cataloging the favor, who had started taking fewer notes on logistics and more notes on things that had nothing to do with the job. That evening, she went back to the workspace to retrieve a file she'd forgotten. The space was empty. Julian's desk was clear except for his notebook, left open and face down at the edge of the surface. He wasn't there. She picked the notebook up to move it away from a cable she was reaching behind. It fell open. Her name on the page, not in a list, not in a schedule. Just Bessie. And beside it, a Korean phrase she couldn't read. And below that, a route that didn't match any path between the hub and the nearest train station. She put the notebook back exactly as she'd found it. Retrieved her file. Turned off her monitor. Left. She walked home in the specific quiet of a person who has found something they weren't looking for and can no longer pretend they haven't found it. She went back the next morning before anyone else arrived. She told herself she was preparing for the final project push, which was partially true. The notebook was still there. Face down, where she'd left it. She picked it up and opened it. She went through it slowly. The coffee preference, written after the second-week production meeting. Her sentence about the project's emotional intent, transcribed in full, as if he'd needed to hold it outside his own memory to examine it. A note from the lookout. Clouds cooperated 4:17 p.m. 40 minutes. She did not check her phone once. As if that were remarkable. As if he'd understood exactly why it was remarkable. And on the last page she'd seen, the Korean phrase, her name in the margin, the route below. She photographed the phrase, sent it to a translation app, waited. She called Kiara while the app was loading. A call, not a voice note. The first real call since she'd arrived. Kiara picked up on the second ring. "Bessie, it's early." "I know." "Real version or organized version?" "Real." "Then go ahead," she told her. All of it, the airport, the forms, the lookout, and what the silence had felt like, the retreat, hers and his, happening simultaneously and for the same reason. The notebook, the fact that she had spent weeks building armor around the possibility of this, while also, she now understood, walking toward it every single day. When she finished, Kiara was quiet for a moment. "You're afraid of needing him," Kiara said. "So you decided to need no one, and you're calling it being focused." Bessie was quiet. "You can do everything alone," Kiara said. "You've always been able to do everything alone. That was never in question. But you came here to prove it again, because it felt safer than asking whether there might be a different way to do things." A pause. "The question was never whether you're capable, Bess. The question is whether capable is the only thing you want to be." Her phone buzzed. The translation had loaded. "집 같은 사람이 있다는 걸 잊고 있었다." The translation. "I had forgotten that a person could feel like home." She went very still. "Kiara," she said, "I'm here. I have to go. I know you do." Warmly, without pushing. "You're allowed to want this. That's all I wanted to say." She hung up. She sat in the empty workspace with the notebook open in her hands, and the city outside beginning its weekday acceleration, and she thought about a person who had written the most honest thing she'd read in months in the margin of a work notebook, without intending it to be found, and who had still written it. Which meant, she understood now, that some part of him had already decided to stop pretending. She opened her email. She found the extension application. She submitted it before anyone else arrived. Then she set the notebook in the center of Julian's desk, closed, and went to her workstation to begin the final push on the project. The notebook was no longer face down. T'Preen. The presentation was on a Tuesday in the last week of October. Bessie stood alone inside the installation for 11 minutes before the audience came in. Not second-guessing. She was past that. Just inhabiting it. The entry was narrow, as Julian had suggested. Narrower than felt comfortable. And then the room opened. The sound design shifted. The text on the walls was not explanatory, just present, like something overheard rather than declared. The materials changed in texture from the entrance to the center. Harder, colder at the threshold, warmer, more human at the heart. It was, she knew with the specific certainty of someone who had built outward from the true thing rather than around it, the most honest work she had ever made. The program director walked through it twice. 3 of the other residents stood in the center for longer than the runtime required. A woman Bessie didn't recognize touched one of the wall panels, and then looked at her with an expression she recognized. The expression of something landing without warning, in the way that true things do. Hyejin went last. She walked the full installation without stopping, returned to the entrance, walked it again. Then she came to where Bessie was standing near the exit and reached into her hair bun. She took out the pen. She signed the program completion form, the official one, the one that would accompany the project into the curated archive, and set it on the table. "The version you were afraid to show," Hyejin said. "That's the one that stayed." She left without ceremony. Bessie understood that this was the ceremony. She stayed in the room until the last visitor cleared out. Then she carried her portfolio bag to the exit and pushed through the door to the outside and breathed the late October Seoul air. Cold, direct, not particularly cinematic, which was fine. She was done needing things to be cinematic. Julian was at the base of the steps. He wasn't facing the door. He was looking at his phone, or doing something that gave him a reason to be there that was not obviously waiting, though he had clearly been there for a while. When the door opened, he put his phone away and looked up. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the airport. Not assessing, not cautious, just present, without the armor that people usually bring to the moments that matter. "I'm not going to pretend this was just work for me," he said. No preamble, no softening, just accurate. "I should have said that before the retreat instead of during it." She came down 2 steps. Stopped. "I found your notebook," she said. "Last week." I translated the phrase. He absorbed this without flinching, the expression of a man who had considered this possibility and had not changed the phrase regardless. "Then you know," he said. "I know." She came down the last step. Same level, same ground. I also know you've been building your life around your father's reality, and around this city, and around the decision that those things mean you don't get to want something for yourself. I know because I've been doing the same thing from a different direction, deciding that needing someone is the same as losing the person you work to become. He was still. I submitted the extension this morning, she said. 4 weeks. Not a solution, not a promise. An honest next thing between two people who are both old enough to know that the honest next thing is the only thing worth doing. He looked at her for a long moment. Something loosened in him. Not dramatic, not collapse. The quiet release of a person who has been holding something in place for a long time and has just been offered the first good reason to set it down. He reached into his jacket, brought out the notebook, held it out. She looked at it. "It's already yours," he said. "I was just carrying it." She took it. It was lighter than it had any right to be, given everything it was carrying. "Your father," she said. "I want to meet him. Not to fix anything. Not because it's a step in a process. Because he's part of what made you who you are. And I'm interested in who you are. That's all." Julian looked at her with the specific expression of someone encountering a thing they hadn't let themselves imagine. Not because they hadn't wanted it. Because imagining it had felt like too much of a risk. "He'd like you," Julian said quietly. "He respects people who don't apologize for being somewhere." She stayed. They were quiet for a moment on the steps outside the building while Soul moved around them. And sometimes staying is the bravest thing someone can do. They chose truth, not the easy version, the adult one, with its complications and its real costs and its honest next thing rather than its perfect one. If you made it this far, you chose to stay too. Thank you. It's what keeps us writing stories like this. Teatro. That night, Bessie sat at the apartment window with the city below, and Julian's notebook on the table beside her. She didn't open it. She knew what was inside. She picked up her phone, opened the voice memo app, hit record. The organized voice was right there. She could feel it, ready and familiar, prepared to say everything's fine, and the project went well, and talk soon. And all the other phrases she'd used for years to describe a version of her life that was accurate without being true. She had been in Seoul for 11 weeks. She had built something honest enough that a stranger had stopped in the center of it and touched the wall, stayed longer than the runtime asked for, and left without saying anything because the work had made words feel like the smaller option. She had let a woman with a pen and a ruthless eye tell her the hardest thing about her work, and had been able to hear it, sit with it, use it. She had sat in silence on a lookout point for 10 minutes, and stopped performing, and found that the silence had a weight that was easier than the performance. So much easier it had embarrassed her a little. How good it felt to simply be somewhere without making it mean something about her. She had found someone who didn't need her composed. Who had written, in the margin of a logistics notebook, the most honest sentence she'd encountered in years. And had written it not to show her, but because honesty, practiced long enough, becomes a reflex you can't always control. "Hey, Mom," she said, and she let the organized voice stay where it was. "The project went well," she said, but in the real register, the one she kept for Kiara and for late-night calls, and for moments when the distance between what she showed and what she felt was too large to maintain without cost. More than well. Jin signed it. You would have been proud, but the specific kind, not the kind that's about the result, but the kind that's about what it cost to do it honestly instead of safely. I think you'd understand the difference. She paused. Outside, Seoul moved in its nighttime rhythm, layered, lit, indifferent in the particular way that cities are, which is also the way that cities are honest. The city didn't need her to have arrived prepared. It had just been there, moving, waiting to see what she'd do. She had built something in it. She had let someone see her in it. She was staying. "I'm staying 4 more weeks," she said. "And there's someone I want to tell you about. Not because it's simple. It's an adult thing, real and complicated. The kind where nobody saves anyone and both people have to choose on purpose and keep choosing. But his name is Julian, and he carries a lot of things quietly, and he saw me on my first day here, without me asking to be seen. And when I was trying very hard to look like I had everything figured out, he just gave me the information I needed and didn't ask for anything in return. She was quiet for a moment. I think I understand now why that stayed with me. Because I'd never been in a room with someone who helped without it being a transaction. And I didn't have a category for it. And it turned out the category it belonged to was this. She looked at the notebook on the table. She looked at the city. "I'm not fine," she said. And the words arrived lighter than she expected. The way all true things do when you finally stop storing them. I mean, I'm okay. I'm more than okay. But I'm not fine. And for the first time in a long time, that's not a problem. That's just what's true. She ended the recording. Sent it. Her phone showed 3 seconds of her mother reading the message, and then the 3 dots of someone composing a reply that was taking a moment because it needed to be the right one. She sent Julian a message. "My mother is going to want to talk to you. Fair warning." His reply came in under a minute. "I'll write down what I need to know in advance." She laughed, the real one, the loud one, the Kiara laugh, in her apartment at midnight, in a city that had started to feel like somewhere she was living, rather than somewhere she was surviving. She put the phone down. She sat with the notebook on the table, and the city outside the window, and the particular quiet of a person who has stopped performing being okay and started simply being it. She had not come to Seoul to find someone. She had come to prove something, and she had, just not the proof she'd brought the question looking for. She'd already known she could build alone. She'd been building alone since she was 22. The real question, the one she'd been circling since the airport and the SIM card and the lookout at golden hour, was whether she could build and also let someone stand beside her without it diminishing what she'd built. The answer, it turned out, was yes. The answer was that trust didn't erase the person she'd worked to become. It gave that person somewhere real to exist. The city was lit. The notebook was on the table. Her mother's reply arrived. "I knew, from your voice, that this one was different. I've been waiting for this voice note for a long time. Come home when you're ready, and bring him for dinner." Bessie read it twice. Then she set the phone down and looked at the window and the city beyond it. And she felt, quietly and without performance, the precise sensation of having arrived somewhere she hadn't known she was going. She didn't say everything's fine. She told the truth. And the truth, it turned out, felt exactly like coming home. End.